Imagine stepping into a brand new nation, just a few years out from a really tough revolution, and suddenly the air is just thick with tension.
Yeah.
Your ships are being grabbed on the open sea, and back home, the whole idea of how this country should even run is sparking these fiery debates. It sounds like it was pushing things right to the edge.
Oh, absolutely. This isn't just some dry historical fact. This was the reality in the early American Republic, right after the Constitution was ratified.
A really intense time.
It truly is a fascinating period. Roughly 1790 to 1820.
Yeah.
You could say the United States was like a teenager, still figuring itself out after leaving home, struggling to define what independence really meant.
Right.
So our deep dive today is all about digging into how this fledgling nation navigated that really tumultuous self-discovery. It led to the kind of unexpected birth of our political parties, facing down global threats, and ultimately shaping the country in ways that, still echo in our politics today.
And it's those echoes that are so compelling, aren't they? When the Constitution was first ratified, there weren't any organized political parties.
No, not at all. The framers actually saw them as dangerous, like factions that could tear the country apart.
But that didn't last long. Almost immediately, these really bitter arguments about the size and the scope of the new national government started popping up. And those disagreements, they changed everything. What was the core of that first split, really, beyond just specific policies?
Well, what's really fascinating here is that the initial divide wasn't just about laws. It was about two fundamentally different visions for what America should be.
Okay.
On one side, you had the Federalists. Now, they believed in a strong central government. They were deeply fearful of what they called unchecked democracy. They looked across the Atlantic at the French Revolution, which had started in 1789, and by 93, 94 was deep in the bloody terror phase. And they saw those excesses as like a dire warning, a warning against too much popular control.
So they were basically saying, hold on, let's not go too far with this whole democracy thing. They thought political participation should be linked to property rights.
Exactly. Which, of course, excluded many citizens. And they definitely didn't think the revolution had just erased traditional social hierarchies.
Right.
To them, the idea of everyone being truly equal was, well, kind of absurd. Women, black people, native peoples, they were seen as distinctly secondary to white male citizens.
Yeah.
Figures like George Washington, John Adams, they really represented this viewpoint.
Okay, so that's one vision. Who was on the other side?
Their polar opposite,
Yeah.
the Democratic-Republicans, they strongly opposed these federalist ideas of elitism, fearing oppression by, a new aristocracy. They championed limited government, individual rights, and put enormous trust in the yeoman farmer. That's the independent landowning citizen working their own land, seen as the backbone of the republic, self-reliant, free from the corruption of cities or big finance.
But that vision also had its limits, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's important to note, this idealized vision also largely excluded women and non-white men. Thomas Jefferson and James Madison were the key figures here.
So you've got these two really different foundational visions emerging. The stage is set for their first big clash, and it comes down to money.
Pretty much. Enter Alexander Hamilton, Washington's Secretary of the Treasury, a brilliant guy, an ardent nationalist who truly believed in a strong federal government.
And the country needed help financially, right? The U.S. was in a terrible state after the revolution.
Dire straits is putting it mildly. Federal debt over $53 million. States had another $25 million combined. The country was basically seen as a global credit risk.
So what was Hamilton's big idea?
His plan, laid out in his Report on Public Credit in early 1790, was audacious. He proposed that the federal government honor all these debts, including the old depreciated paper money from the war, at face value.
Wow.
His goal was to bind the wealthy creditors, both here and abroad, to the success of the new government. By paying the debt, he'd make them literally invested in its future. He proposed selling federal bonds to make this happen.
That sounds clever. He wasn't just fixing the books. He was building support for the federal government itself.
Exactly. He was creating a powerful constituency with a direct financial stake in federal stability and power.
But I remember reading there was a big controversy around speculators.
Oh, huge. This is where it got really messy.
Yeah.
A lot of the original war bonds and notes had been bought up by speculators from, say, poor veterans for just pennies on the dollar.
Ouch.
Yeah. So when Hamilton proposed paying these notes at full value, people like James Madison were furious. They saw it as deeply unfair, basically rewarding the speculators and cheating the original soldiers who'd sacrificed. It sparked a massive fight in Congress.
I can imagine. How did Hamilton pull it off?
Politics. To get the support he needed, especially from powerful Virginians like Madison and Jefferson, Hamilton cut a deal.
What was the deal?
He agreed to support moving the nation's capital away from New York City, down to a more southern location along the Potomac River.
Which became Washington, D.C.
Precisely. A classic political trade-off. Location for financial policy. It literally shaped the map of American power.
And Hamilton wasn't done. His next big push was for a national bank, wasn't it? Kind of like the Bank of England.
Right. Proposed in late 1790. The idea was to stabilize the economy, regulate all of the different state banknotes floating around, issue loans, handle government money.
Another huge fight, I assume.
Monumental. Jefferson fought it tooth and nail. He argued the Constitution didn't explicitly say Congress could create a national bank.
Strict interpretation.
Exactly. But Hamilton came back with this idea of implied powers. He pointed to the necessary and proper clause in the Constitution.
Ah, the elastic clause.
Right. Hamilton argued that if the Constitution gives the government certain jobs, like collecting taxes, it implies they have the power to do what's necessary to do that job, like creating a bank to manage the money, even if bank isn't written down.
In Washington.
Washington ultimately sided with Hamilton. The Bank of the United States was chartered in 1791.
So this wasn't just about a bank. It was a fundamental argument about how to read the Constitution. It opened the door for a much stronger federal government down the line, didn't it?
Absolutely. It set a huge precedent for expanding federal power. Then Hamilton followed up with his Report on Manufactures. He wanted a whiskey tax for revenue, tariffs on imports, and even federal subsidies to boost American industry.
Trying to break free from relying on foreign goods.
Exactly. Build a diversified American economy. And, the overall impact of Hamilton's program was massive. It really did rescue the U.S. from near bankruptcy, jump-started American capitalism.
It sounds like it really set the course for America's economic future.
It did. It fostered creditworthiness, promoted commerce, even spurred the stock market. But it also deeply encoded this pro-business, federally driven capitalism into the system.
And that naturally fueled the opposition.
You bet. Madison and Jefferson felt Hamilton was going way too far, creating the kind of centralized, potentially aristocratic system they'd fought a revolution to escape. Jefferson especially distrusted cities and finance. He idealized that republic of, virtuous yeoman farmers.
So this is where the Democratic-Republican Party really starts to take shape, and they started fighting back, using the press.
Oh yeah, they got organized. Jefferson actually secretly funded Philip Freneau's National Gazette newspaper, specifically to counter the Federalist paper, the Gazette of the United States.
So much for objective news.
Not even close. These papers were openly partisan. They existed to promote their party's views and attack the other side, viciously sometimes.
And it wasn't just newspapers, right? People formed societies.
Democratic-Republican societies popped up, made of artisans, small farmers, others who felt Washington's administration was just enriching the elite. They saw themselves as patriots, preserving republicanism against this rising commercial class. They held meetings, published pamphlets, organized parades, basically building grassroots political power.
It's striking, though, that amidst all this debate between white men about the future of the republic, there was pretty broad agreement on excluding others.
A stark consensus, unfortunately. The 1790 Naturalization Act made it crystal clear. Citizenship was for a free white person. This shut the door on enslaved people, free Black Americans, Native Americans, Asians.
But there was that one weird exception in New Jersey for a while.
Yes, a really surprising fact. From 1776 until 1807, New Jersey actually allowed unmarried women who owned a certain amount of property to vote.
Wow, that's incredible for the time.
It was truly radical, and both parties, Federalists and Democratic-Republicans, actually competed for their votes. Sadly, the state legislature closed that loophole in 1807, restricting voting back to just free white men, a brief, fascinating experiment.
So the internal political battle lines are being drawn, but the new nation also had to deal with a very messy world outside its borders. The French Revolution looms large here.
Hugely divisive. Initially, many Americans were inspired, saw it as echoing their own revolution, but then came the execution of King Louis XVI in 1793, the Terror.
Things got bloody.
Very bloody. Federalists looked at the violence and chaos with alarm. They feared that kind of radicalism spreading here. But the Democratic Republicans, while maybe uneasy about the extremes, often saw it as a necessary, if brutal, step to get rid of monarchy and aristocracy, the price of real revolution, you might say.
And this spilled over into U.S. politics with Citizen Genet.
Oh, the Citizen Genet affair in '93 was a diplomatic mess. Edmond Charles Genet, the French envoy, lands in the U.S. and basically starts acting like France owns the place. He's arming captured British ships in American ports, trying to recruit American privateers to fight Spain.
Well, Washington had declared neutrality.
But he was openly defying the U.S. government. Washington and Hamilton were furious. They knew his actions could easily drag the U.S. into war with Britain, a war they absolutely couldn't afford. And sure enough, Britain started seizing hundreds of American ships in response.
A total nightmare, which led to Jay's Treaty.
Right. In 1794, Washington sent Chief Justice John Jay to Britain to try and patch things up. Jay managed to get compensation for the seized ships, got the British to finally agree to leave their force in the Northwest, and opened up some trade in the West Indies.
But the big sticking point was impressment, wasn't it? The British forcing American sailors into their navy.
And Jay's treaty didn't address it at all. That omission absolutely enraged the Democratic-Republicans. They saw it as a sellout, a betrayal of Republican France, proof that the Federalists were secretly pro-British, pro-monarchy.
So it just deepened the partisan divide.
Massively. Though interestingly, Jay's treaty did have an unintended positive consequence. It spooked Spain into thinking the U.S. and Britain were getting too cozy.
Leading to Pinckney's Treaty.
Spain quickly negotiated Pinckney's Treaty, which gave American farmers access to the vital port of New Orleans and the right to navigate the Mississippi River. That was huge for the West.
Meanwhile, closer to home, things were erupting in the Caribbean too. Haiti.
Yes, the Haitian Revolution. Starting in 1791, the massive slave uprising in the French colony of Saint-Domingue, led by Toussaint Louverture. Then, France abolished slavery in its colonies in 1794. This sent shockwaves through the U.S.
How so?
Well, you had white refugee planters fleeing to the U.S., bringing their enslaved people and also free people of color. This fed Federalist fears about French radicalism spreading. But even more profoundly, especially in the South, the site of a successful slave revolution just offshore, it was terrifying. It stoked deep anxieties about their own enslaved populations.
And right around the same time, 1794, there's a major challenge to federal authority within the U.S., the Whiskey Rebellion.
Right. This stemmed directly from Hamilton's financial plan specifically, that tax of 7.5 cents per gallon on whiskey and rum.
Which hit Western farmers hardest.
For farmers in western Pennsylvania, distilling grain into whiskey wasn't about making fancy cocktails. It was the most economical way to get their crop to market over the Appalachian Mountains. Grain was bulky and expensive to transport. Whiskey was much less so.
So they saw the tax as unfair, favoring Eastern merchants.
Deeply unfair. And they reacted violently. Tarring and feathering federal tax collectors, intercepting mail, intimidating officials. Some even talked about forming an independent Western country, maybe with British or Spanish help.
Wow, a direct challenge to the new government.
It absolutely was. And many rebels identified with the Democratic-Republicans, seeing the tax as a Federalist scheme to crush their liberty.
How did Washington handle it?
Decisively. He called up a militia of 13,000 men larger than the army he commanded during much of the Revolution, and personally led them, part of the way at least, into western Pennsylvania.
He showed up with an army.
He did. The rebellion basically collapsed without a major battle. But the message was clear. The new federal government under the Constitution would enforce its laws, unlike the weak government under the Articles of Confederation.
It proved the government had teeth.
Precisely. Hamilton actually wrote about it, arguing it was about whether the majority would rule or be ruled, whether there would be government or anarchy. It really highlighted that Federalist fear of mob action.
And while dealing with internal rebellion, the government was also pushing westward, which meant dealing with Native Americans.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the general consensus among white citizens in the government was pretty clear. Native Americans were seen as obstacles to white settlement.
Leading to conflict.
Yes. The Battle of Fallen Timbers in 1794 was a major defeat for the Western Confederacy of Tribes. The resulting Treaty of Greenville in 1795 forced them to cede huge amounts of land in present-day Ohio, pushing them further west.
So Washington steps down after 2 terms, setting that precedent, and then we get the first truly contested partisan election in 1796.
That's right. Federalist John Adams versus Democratic-Republican Thomas Jefferson. Adams wins, but narrowly, and Jefferson becomes his vice president, which sounds incredibly awkward today.
A VP from the opposing party, imagine that. And Adams inherits a tense situation with France.
Very tense. The French were angry about Jay's treaty, saw it as siding with Britain. So they started seizing American ships, hundreds of them, mainly in the West Indies. This leads to the Quasi-War,
Quasi-War.
an undeclared naval war between the U.S. and France from about 1796 to 1800. Adams actually starts building up the U.S. Navy in response.
And then comes the XYZ affair. That sounds like something out of a spy novel.
It kind of does.
Yeah.
In 1797, Adams sent diplomats to Paris to negotiate. But the French foreign minister, Talleyrand, sent 3 secret agents. Adams referred to them as X, Y, and Z in his reports to Congress, who demanded a huge bribe, like 50,000 pounds, plus a massive loan just to start talking.
A bribe just to negotiate.
Yeah, a blatant shakedown. When the news broke in America, people were outraged. Millions for defense, but not 1 cent for tribute became the slogan.
That must have really hurt the Democratic-Republicans who had been more pro-French.
Absolutely. It made the Federalists look completely right about French corruption and hostility. Public opinion swung hard against France.
And this anti-French feeling led to the Alien and Sedition Acts.
Passed by the Federalist-controlled Congress in 1798, ostensibly as war measures. The Alien Acts made it harder for immigrants to become citizens and gave the president power to deport anyone deemed dangerous.
Targeting French immigrants, presumably.
Largely, yes. But the Sedition Act was even more controversial. It made it a crime to publish false, scandalous, or malicious writings against the government or its officials.
Whoa. That sounds like a direct attack on free speech in the press.
It absolutely was. It directly targeted Democratic-Republican newspapers and critics. It raised huge First Amendment questions. The Democratic-Republicans saw it as a blatant attempt to silence opposition and crush liberty.
How did they respond?
Jefferson and Madison secretly drafted the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. These argued that the Alien and Sedition Acts were unconstitutional.
And they introduced this idea of
Nullification. The radical idea that states had the right to judge the constitutionality of federal laws and declare them null and void within their own borders.
Did other states agree?
No, most other states rejected the idea at the time. But the concept of nullification and states' rights would keep coming back, most dramatically in the lead-up to the Civil War.
Adams did eventually end the Quasi-War, though, right?
He did, to his credit. He secured the Treaty of Mortefontaine in 1800, restoring peace and trade with France. But it deeply divided his own Federalist Party. Many wanted full-scale war, and probably cost him re-election. He put peace above party.
Which brings us to the election of 1800. Jefferson called it the Revolution of 1800. Why was it so significant?
Because it marked the first peaceful transfer of power from one political party to another in American history. Jefferson, the Democratic-Republican, defeated the incumbent Federalist, Adams.
That doesn't sound revolutionary now, but back then...
It was huge. In most places at that time, a change in ruling faction often meant violence, coups, or civil war. The fact that it happened peacefully through an election set an incredibly important precedent for American democracy.
Though the campaign itself was pretty nasty, wasn't it?
Oh, vicious. Tons of mudslinging. And incredibly, Alexander Hamilton, Adams's supposed fellow Federalist, wrote this scathing attack on Adams that the Democratic-Republicans just love and reprinted everywhere. Talk about party infighting.
So Jefferson takes office in 1801. What's his approach?
Pretty much the opposite of the Federalists. He wants to promote agriculture, that agrarian republic ideal. He distrusts cities, wants a limited federal government, cuts taxes like the whiskey tax, shrinks the military. Basically, fiscal austerity and decentralization.
Though he did end up fighting a war overseas.
Right, the Barbary Wars against North African pirates who were seizing American ships. So limited government had its limits when national interests were threatened abroad.
And the courts were still a battleground, Marbury v. Madison.
A landmark case in 1803. Chief Justice John Marshall, a staunch Federalist appointed by Adams right before he left office, delivered the ruling. The specifics are complicated, but the key outcome was Marshall establishing the principle of judicial review.
Meaning the Supreme Court can strike down laws.
The power of the Supreme Court to review acts of Congress and the president and declare them unconstitutional if necessary. It massively boosted the power of the judicial branch, a Federalist legacy Jefferson probably wasn't thrilled about.
And the political bitterness of the era had a truly tragic outcome in 1804.
The Hamilton-Burr duel. Just shocking. Aaron Burr, who was Jefferson's first vice president but had fallen out with him, killed Alexander Hamilton in a duel fueled by years of political rivalry and personal insults.
The sitting vice president killing one of the nation's founders, it's hard to fathom.
It really symbolized the intensity, the personal danger of the political divisions at the time.
But amidst all this turmoil, Jefferson oversaw a massive expansion of the country.
Yes, perhaps his greatest achievement, the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. doubling the size of the United States for $15 million, arguably the greatest real estate deal in American history.
This must have perfectly fit his vision of an agrarian republic, all that land for farmers.
Absolutely. And, crucially, it secured control of New Orleans and the entire Mississippi River, vital for getting agricultural goods from the American interior out to the world market.
And the backstory involves Haiti again.
It does. Napoleon had envisioned Louisiana as a breadbasket for France's incredibly profitable sugar colony, Saint-Domingue, Haiti. But the successful slave revolution there, led by Toussaint Louverture, ruined that plan.
So Napoleon lost interest in Louisiana.
Pretty much. He needed money for his wars in Europe. The Haiti venture had failed. So he decided to cut his losses and sell the vast territory to the Americans.
Which led to Lewis and Clark.
Right, the famous expedition from 1804 to 1806, sent by Jefferson to explore this huge new territory, map it, find a route to the Pacific, and establish relations with native tribes.
Was everyone happy about the purchase?
Not entirely. Some Northerners worried it would lead to the expansion of slavery into new territories. And others, ironically including some strict constructionists, questioned whether the president even had the constitutional authority to buy land like that. Jefferson himself had to stretch his own principles on that one.
So Jefferson's presidency ends, Madison takes over, but the problems with Britain haven't gone away, leading to what some call the Second War of American Independence.
The War of 1812. Yeah, the core issues were still there. Impressment of American sailors, British interference with American trade, and British support for Native American resistance in the West, blocking U.S. expansion.
Jefferson had tried to avoid war with that Embargo Act back in 1807. How did that work out again?
Terribly. He prohibited all American ships from leaving port, hoping to pressure Britain and France economically, but it ended up crippling American commerce far more. Business activity plummeted, like 75%, causing unemployment, bankruptcies. It was an economic disaster.
There's that cartoon of the snapping turtle, "Oh, grab me."
Yes. Embargo spelled backwards. Grabbing a smuggler trying to evade the ban. It perfectly captured the public frustration.
And the native resistance issue was still simmering.
Very much so. The Shawnee leader Tecumseh and his brother Tenskwatawa were trying to build a pan-Indian confederacy to resist U.S. expansion, urging a revival of traditional ways.
And the U.S. suspected British involvement.
Definitely. After the Battle of Tippecanoe in 1811, where U.S. forces defeated Tenskwatawa's followers, they found British-made weapons. This fueled calls for war from the war hawks in Congress, young leaders like Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun, mostly from the South and West.
Who wanted war.
They saw it as necessary to defend American honor, secure the frontier, and maybe even grab Canada. Federalists, especially in the Northeast, strongly opposed it, fearing the disruption to trade, but Congress narrowly voted for war in June 1812.
How did the war go initially?
Not well for the U.S. Early losses, like the surrender of Detroit. The British controlled about half the Northwest Territory at one point.
But things turned around.
Gradually. Key U.S. naval victories, especially on Lake Erie, helped regain control of the region. And the Battle of the Thames, where Tecumseh was killed, was a major blow to Native American resistance in the Old Northwest.
But then Britain finished fighting Napoleon in Europe.
Right. And they could send more troops, veteran troops, to America. In 1814, they launched a major counteroffensive. They marched on Washington, D.C.
And burned it.
Burned the White House, the Capitol. President Madison and the government had to flee. A huge humiliation for the U.S.
But then came Baltimore.
The British fleet bombarded Fort McHenry in Baltimore Harbor for hours. But the fort held out. Seeing the American flag still flying the next morning inspired Francis Scott Key to write the poem that became the Star-Spangled Banner.
A moment of resilience that became iconic.
It turned a defensive stand into a symbol of national endurance.
How did the war end?
With the Treaty of Ghent, signed in December 1814 in Belgium. Interestingly, it basically just ended the fighting and restored the pre-war boundaries. None of the major issues like impressment were even addressed. It was more like a draw.
But there was one more famous battle after the treaty?
Yes, because news traveled so slowly back then. The Battle of New Orleans, fought in January 1815. Andrew Jackson led a ragtag American force to a stunning, decisive victory over a large, experienced British army.
Even though the war was technically over.
Right. But the victory was immense for American morale. It made Andrew Jackson a national hero, secured American control over the Mississippi River Valley, and really cemented the idea of westward expansion. It felt like a true validation of American independence.
Meanwhile, while the war was still going on, the Federalist opposition backfired badly, didn't it? The Hartford Convention.
Oh, spectacularly badly. The war was deeply unpopular in New England, hitting their economy hard. In late 1814, Federalist delegates met in Hartford, Connecticut. They aired grievances, proposed constitutional amendments to weaken Southern and Western power.
And some even talked about secession.
Some did, yes. Discussing secession while the country was at war, it looked incredibly unpatriotic, even treasonous to most Americans.
So that was the end for the Federalists?
Pretty much. The Hartford Convention forever discredited the Federalist Party. They were seen as disloyal. The party basically collapsed on the national stage after that, which led directly into the so-called era of good feelings.
Why good feelings?
Because with the Federalists gone, there was effectively only one major political party left, the Democratic-Republicans. So less partisan fighting, at least on the surface, for a period from about 1815 to the late 1820s.
So looking back at this whole period, 1790 to 1820, it was really a crucible, wasn't it?
The intense fights over finance, foreign policy, the very nature of government, they weren't just arguments. They were actively forging the nation's identity, setting precedents that shape everything that came after.
And it's striking how those foundational debates, federal power versus states' rights, liberty versus order, economic direction, who even counts as an American, they haven't really gone away.
Not at all. They laid the groundwork for so many political arguments we're still having today. It shows that a lot of our current challenges have really deep roots, going right back to the beginning of the American experiment.
So maybe a final thought for our listeners to chew on. How do those early growing pains, creating parties, figuring out implied powers, balancing liberty and unity, navigating a hostile world, how do those struggles still echo in how we understand America today?
It's a great question. It really highlights that the American story wasn't simple or predetermined. It was, and maybe still is, a process of constant negotiation, adaptation, and dealing with some profound built-in contradictions right from the start.